If your child has autism, you have probably heard the word leucovorin at some point. Maybe another parent mentioned it in a support group. Maybe you saw it come up in a late night search when you were trying to understand what else might help your child. It often shows up surrounded by hope, confusion, and a lot of unanswered questions. So let's slow this all the way down and talk clearly about what leucovorin actually is, how it is different from folate or folic acid, how it works in the body, how the brain uses folate, what happens when that system does not work properly, and why folinic acid is sometimes used as a treatment for something called cerebral folate deficiency. Leucovorin is the medication name for folinic acid. Folinic acid is a form of vitamin B9, but it is not the same thing as folic acid, and it's not the same thing as the folate that naturally occurs in food. This distinction matters much more than most people realize. Folinic acid is considered a biologically active form of folate. That means the body can use it more directly without having to go through as many conversion steps. Leucovorin has been used in medicine for decades. It did not originate in autism research, and it was not developed as an autism treatment. It has long been used in oncology, hematology, and other medical settings where folate metabolism is critical. To understand why leucovorin is different, it helps to understand the different forms of vitamin B9. Folate is the natural form of vitamin B9 found in foods like leafy greens, beans, lentils, and citrus fruits. Folic acid is a synthetic form of vitamin B9. It is added to fortified foods and is commonly used in supplements. Folic acid is not biologically active on its own. The body must convert it through several steps before it can be used. Those conversion steps rely on specific enzymes and metabolic pathways. Folinic acid, on the other hand, is already in a reduced and active form. It bypasses many of the steps that folic acid requires. This means that for people who have difficulty converting or transporting folate, folinic acid can sometimes still be used effectively by the body. Folate is essential for life. It plays a role in DNA synthesis, cell division, and cellular repair. It is involved in the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. It supports red blood cell formation and helps regulate gene expression. Every rapidly dividing tissue in the body depends on folate to function properly. The brain, especially during development, is one of the most folate-dependent organs in the human body. Without adequate folate availability, brain development and brain function can be affected in subtle or significant ways. The brain does not simply absorb folate from the bloodstream the way some other tissues do. It is protected by something called the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier acts like a highly selective filter. Its job is to protect the brain from toxins and harmful substances, but it also means that nutrients need specific transport mechanisms to get through. Folate relies on specialized transport proteins to cross the blood-brain barrier and enter the central nervous system. When this system works properly, folate moves from the blood into the brain and supports normal neurological function. Problems arise when that transport system does not work as it should. This leads to a condition known as cerebral folate deficiency. Cerebral folate deficiency occurs when folate levels in the brain are low, despite normal or even high folate levels in the blood. This is one of the most important and often misunderstood points. Standard blood tests can show normal folate status, while the brain itself is not receiving enough folate. In many cases, researchers believe this happens because of autoantibodies that interfere with folate receptors at the blood-brain barrier. These antibodies can block or impair folate transport into the brain. When the brain does not receive enough folate, neurological symptoms can appear. These symptoms vary widely depending on the individual, the severity of the deficiency, and the timing during development. Symptoms associated with cerebral folate deficiency can include speech and language delays, developmental regression, attention difficulties, irritability, motor coordination problems, and in some cases, seizures. Not every child with autism has cerebral folate deficiency, and not every child with cerebral folate deficiency has autism. However, research has shown that a subset of autistic children do show evidence of impaired folate transport into the brain. This is where leucovorin comes into the picture. Folinic acid has the ability to use alternative pathways to cross into the brain. Even when folate receptors are partially blocked, folinic acid can sometimes still cross the blood-brain barrier and increase folate availability in the brain. This is not because it is stronger or because it forces the brain to do something unnatural. It is because its chemical structure allows it to bypass some of the transport limitations that affect other forms of folate. Once folinic acid enters the body, it does not need to be converted in the same way that folic acid does. It is already in a form that cells can use. Inside cells, folinic acid participates in one-carbon metabolism, a set of biochemical reactions that are essential for neurotransmitter production, DNA repair, and cellular communication. These processes are foundational to brain function. Folinic acid does not act like a stimulant, and it does not change brain chemistry in a dramatic or artificial way. It supports existing biological pathways that may not be functioning optimally. Over the past several years, clinical studies have explored the use of leucovorin in children with autism, particularly those with significant language delays. Some studies have found improvements in verbal communication, especially in children who test positive for folate receptor autoantibodies. Other areas where changes have sometimes been observed include attention, social engagement, and irritability. It is essential to be clear and honest here. Leucovorin is not a cure for autism. It does not work for every child. The response varies widely and appears to be strongest in specific subgroups rather than across the entire autism spectrum. One of the reasons responses vary is because autism itself is not a single condition with a single cause. It is a broad neurodevelopmental spectrum involving many different biological pathways. Leucovorin appears to be helpful primarily when folate metabolism or transport is part of the underlying issue. If that pathway is not impaired, adding folinic acid may not produce noticeable changes. This is why responsible clinicians emphasize evaluation, careful monitoring, and individualized decision-making rather than one-size-fits-all approaches. Leucovorin is a prescription medication. Dosage is typically based on weight and clinical context. It is not something that should be used without medical supervision. While side effects are generally mild, some children may experience irritability, sleep changes, or gastrointestinal discomfort, particularly when starting treatment or adjusting doses. Any intervention should be guided by a qualified healthcare professional who understands the child's full medical history and developmental profile. There are also common misconceptions that deserve clarification. One of the most frequent misunderstandings is the idea that leucovorin is just a vitamin and therefore harmless. While it is related to a vitamin, leucovorin is pharmacologically active and can have real biological effects. Another misconception is that higher doses automatically lead to better outcomes. Biology does not work that way. Balance matters, and more is not always better. This topic often generates intense interest because parents of autistic children are constantly searching for ways to support their child's development and quality of life. When something shows even modest benefits for some children, it can spread quickly through communities. That hope is understandable and deeply human. At the same time, it is important that hope is grounded in accurate information rather than exaggerated claims or fear-based marketing. Leucovorin is best understood as a targeted intervention for a specific biological pathway. It is not a replacement for speech therapy, occupational therapy, or educational support. It is not a universal solution, and it does not change who a child is. For some children, under the right circumstances, it may support brain function in a meaningful way. For others, it may have little or no effect. Both outcomes are valid, and neither reflects failure or success on the part of a parent. If you are hearing about leucovorin and wondering whether it applies to your child, the most important step is not rushing into treatment or chasing protocols online. The most important step is understanding why it might be used and who it is most likely to help. Autism is complex. Brains are complex. Thoughtful care respects that complexity rather than trying to simplify it away. You are not behind if you are still learning. You are not doing something wrong if one approach does not help your child. And you are not alone in asking these questions. Taking the time to understand the science calmly and carefully is already an act of care. If this explanation helped make leucovorin clearer, you can follow for more grounded and evidence based explanations like this. And if there is another topic you want broken down in a way that actually makes sense, you are always welcome to ask.